So welcome to Bridging Worlds Animal Communication, Energy and Healing Conference. I'm Dr. Jeff Grognet. I'm your host, and with me is Nancy Windhart. And Nancy is an internationally recognized animal communicator and also interspecies communication teacher. Her work has been featured in a lot of places: television, radio, magazine, and on the online media. And she's written for many digital and print publications. Nancy teaches courses and training programs in interspecies communication and also Reiki for all species. And that's both for lay people and those that want to practice professionally. She provides animal communication consultations and also professional animal communication and Reiki mentoring for clients worldwide. She lives in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and she has her animal family of dogs, cats, and chickens. So welcome, Nancy.
Thank you, Jeff. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today.
Yeah. Well, you've got some neat stuff going on, and I think we're going to be telling a few stories as time goes on. That'll be the main thing. And so the main thing is communication. The people always ask, well, I don't know how to do that. So how do we fix that?
That's a great question. So, that I think we're titling this conversation Animal Communication for Everyone. And that is really the foundation of my work, because when we think about telepathic communication, intuitive interspecies communication, whatever language you want to use to describe that, what we're really talking about is a universal language. And so we all come in with this ability. We all know how to do this. It's innate. It's our birthright. It's not something that just a special few people get who are, the ones who are called animal communicators, and nobody else can do it. This is a natural language, and all species share it. And so, of course, what's happened is that our human species, it has forgotten how to use this language. And so many of us have. And so really, in answer to your question, how do we do that? It's just a matter of relearning and reclaiming and remembering something we know already, something we have already, and that all of the other species in the world share and can help us as humans to relearn and rediscover that.
Yeah. Yeah. As you're talking about it, we're all born with it. I thought of this analogy. All of us are born knowing how to bowl. But those of us start thinking of limitations. I don't know how to bowl. I've never bowled before. I'm not sure how to do it. I'm going to look stupid when I try to do it. All those things, right? And so therefore, a lot of people don't go bowling.
Right. Right.
But everybody can do it. And as
Right.
long as you
Right.
as long as you go and do it, and as I say, and you just want to go have fun, anyone can do it.
Right,
You know,
because we can
and
develop that capacity to do that motion that we call bowling, right?
yeah,
Yeah, and it is similar. I would say the only difference between this way of communicating and the bowling analogy is that we have to develop a certain amount of physicality to kind of toss that bowling ball, right? But with this language, infants are actually great teachers, because babies will know how to, that's the way babies communicate with their caregivers, right? It's this innate telepathic communication. We call it parents' intuition, right? But that's what it is. That's what's going on there.
yeah, yeah. So we've all got it. We
Yeah.
just have to reach back and say, okay, how do I do this?
Yeah. And I think to your other point, looking at the things that get in our way, which are all those, the examples that you shared about all the things we tell ourselves about why we're not going to be any good at it. And we're going to be the one person who's not going to be able to do this or
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah, as in I can't draw a picture. And it's when I try, it's kind of obvious that I can't, but it's again, when I was younger, I probably did it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well enough. Okay. Okay. So with communication, like you say, a lot of people already have it, correct?
Yeah. Absolutely. And so one of the things that I invite people to think about who are interested in this and, maybe aren't sure that they have it or are brand new to this is to think about times when they've used communication already, right?
Mm.
And, I know there's a lot of animal lovers here in this audience and people who have animal companions in their homes, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And so I have yet to meet a person who lives with and loves animals as part of their family who has not experienced this kind of communication, whether they're aware of it or not. So, some examples might be, uh, say you have your habit in the evenings, you have dinner, then you wash the dishes, then it's time to take your dog for a walk, right?
Mhm.
And of course, our animals get conditioned to our routines and our habits, but maybe you think you're going to take your dog for a walk at a different time of day than you normally walk, but you think, oh, it would be nice to go for a walk right now. And no sooner have you had that thought than your dog's at the door waiting to go, right? That's a simple example of how animals can receive communication. And it can go the other way too, where, many people will have had experiences with their animal friends of, for example, just having a feeling, I got to go out to the barn and check the horses one last time before I go to bed. And they go out and there's something that needs attention, right? Or I have a feeling something's just off with my cat. I can't say what it is. I'm not seeing anything externally, but I just have this gut feeling that there's something wrong. I'm going to make an appointment with my vet. And you go to the vet and, something indeed is there that needs to be attended to. So people have these experiences all the time. They don't recognize them as communication necessarily. Sometimes people will say, oh, well, that was a coincidence. Or, what a synchronistic thing. When actually it is a communication back and forth between people and their animals. So one of the things I just invite people to do is to think about those times where you've had those moments of having that gut feeling or having that message that you're not sure, did that come from my animal or did that come from my own thoughts or whatever? But think about those times where you've had those really deep connections with your animal friends and recognize that those are times that you've actually used this kind of communication.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. No, there's, I mean, look, I'm just, it's like I say, just living with them.
Mm-hmm.
You get messages back and forth, and my favorite one with Shay is that, yeah, I think I'll go out. I'm going to go out in half an hour, and then even though I just think that, then he's already looking at me going, okay, you're on it,
Right.
like,
Yeah.
and that's
Yeah.
it's the joke, and that is, because his walk time is unpredictable. He does not know when we're going for a walk, but I'll tell my wife that, yeah, I think I'm going to go in half an hour. And you look at the dog and he's already got that look. And all she says now is, well, you better not be late.
Yeah. Yeah.
'Cause
That's great.
the,
Yeah.
the dog can tell time.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Yeah. But you're right. These probably everybody's had something. And the thing that I tend to get, I mean, yeah, I'll get little things from Shay now and then, okay, that he's sending these messages, which are just for routine things. Okay. But but being in practice, the thing about that is that now and then I would get, as I call it, hit with a communication thing, and that is, I'll have animals that suddenly blatantly fire a message at me, and it's high emotion,
Hmm.
and maybe that's what I need to break through my barriers so I can feel it. I mean, that's what I think anyway. But yeah, I've had a few of those which have been sort of end of life ones, which actually changed the decisions on what we were doing in the end.
I wonder, would you be willing to share an example of one of those if you could do that?
Well, yeah, there's the one that was really uh, was the most profound one. I had an elderly gentleman bring in his old dog, like it was a 14-year-old, border collie thingy, and anyway, carried him in. And obviously this dog's in pretty rough shape, right? And so the main thing, we got him in and put up a nice big padded fleece on the table and put him on there, and the dog is flat out. Okay. And so I just started talking to the guy, saying, okay, what's going on? And like he just said, this dog had been going down for a week. I hadn't eaten for 3 days. Like, okay, we're in trouble here, right? And as soon as I took my attention off him, and then I went to the dog and put my hand on the dog, and as soon as I did that, it was like boom, I just got hit. And what I mean is, all of a sudden, I just felt this grief, and it was a case of, whoa, that was kind of heavy, and it just, anyway, it got to the point. I mean, I sort of just kept there and just sort of kept looking at the dog and things, and not doing anything with the owner at that point. And actually, it was so heavy that I actually told the owner at that moment, and I says, okay, I'm just going to go in the back. I'll just be a second, and I went back, got to the office, and broke down.
Mm.
And it was just like I'd been hit with a sledgehammer. I didn't know at that moment what it was, and I started to think about it, started to sort of realize it. And this is where we put another thing into this, and that is, my wife is very good at doing muscle testing. And with that, we started asking questions. Okay, what's going on with this dog? And with that, we were able to sort of see. And the thing we came down to was that this dog did not want to leave because his dad couldn't handle it.
Yeah.
Okay. And in other words, dad wasn't ready. And so anyway, with that in mind, I went back, and the first thing I did, I mean, I was pretty sure what was going on just for my quick exam. I could smell ammonia on the breath. The dog's dehydrated. And just with being that age and what was happening, I figured, okay, we got problems with kidneys here. So got a urine sample, got a blood sample, and an hour later, this dog has terminal kidney disease. I mean, this is not something that we can turn around. Okay. So anyway, the point is, this is how it changed. If I didn't have that event happen, I would have done the blood test, seen what was going on, and then would have said, hey, this guy's gonna, we need to help him go now. Because it's not that the dog was suffering. I mean, he was almost comatose by that point. But the point is, it's like, we're not going to get better. We better just help him go. But with the stuff that I got, then what it changed to was, I was then prepping the owner for the imminent death of his friend. And so I was able to sort of tell him what was going on, what he would be expecting, what's going to happen. And I said, he could go in an hour, or he might go tonight, or it might be 2 days. I says, but he's going to go. I mean, there's no turning back here.
Yeah.
And but with that, I was able to we just gave some fluids to the dog just to help a little bit. Sent him home, and then with dad there, and he had my phone number if he needed it. But I told him what was going on, and he wanted to bury him at home, so I wasn't gonna be involved at that point. But anyway, he took him home, and at about 2 o'clock in the morning, he did pass away.
Yeah.
But it changed, as I say, it changed what I did with that case. And so therefore I was able to support his dad and fulfill the dog's wishes. The dog told me that, the guy wasn't ready. And once I figured that out, it was obvious the guy was not ready, because he was thinking, yeah, we can just treat him and he'll be all fine and go home.
Yeah.
So that's the type of case that I've had, and I've had a few of those very strong emotions that have hit me, and those are the ones you remember.
Yeah.
For sure.
It's such a touching story, Jeff. Thank you for sharing that, because I mean, it's so moving, because you really, by being able to fully receive that dog's communication and intention,
Mhm.
you changed that time, that precious, holy time for both of them in that last half of the day or whatever that
Yeah.
they had together.
Yeah.
And it also highlights a couple things, for me, kind of thinking with my teacher brain, about how this process works. Obviously, one of your strong way, or maybe your strongest way of receiving, is that emotional feeling sense and being able to
Mhm.
receive that strong emotion. And in this case, it's interesting because the human person was not necessarily at that grief stage at that point because he wasn't aware of how close to the end they were when he brought his dog in, but the dog knew, right?
Yeah.
So for you as, an animal communicator to, recognize that's one of your strong ways of receiving, right? And also with that, you got the message or the general sense of knowing about what that grief was, right? It's both, grief. I mean, animals can grieve when they are coming to the end of their lives and they're needing to leave their person, right? That can very much happen. And also that grief of I have to leave and my person is not ready to let me go. He doesn't know yet. He's not aware, right? So that package of communication that you got, that sometimes I just call like a gestalt, or it's like a general knowing. You understood what you were feeling and what was going on. And of course, you had your medical expertise also to be able to really clearly understand what was going on here and what the situation was, right? And so, I mean, it's such a touching example because it came in so fast. It came in as soon as you touched the dog, right? And then from there, like that set the whole trajectory and process for these two beautiful beings to be able to, have that time to complete, right? As much
Yeah.
as they were able to. So, yeah, it's so beautiful.
Yeah. No, it was that actually got me going on taking a course in animal communication
Yeah.
because it
Yeah.
was like, oh, maybe I should try and develop that.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And in my experience and in my opinion, the very best and most compassionate and most skilled veterinarians that I've ever known uh, have that, do this as part of their practice, whether they're aware of it or not.
Yeah.
And whether they, want to talk about it publicly or not. So thank you for sharing it because I think that's going to be helpful for a lot of people.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay. So I mean, you're in your work, obviously you're working with people that have pets and horses, things like that. But does it work with all animals or
Yeah.
what's the scoop there?
All animals, and not even just animals. We can communicate with trees, with plants, with, like all beings. That's one of the reasons that I often will use the word interspecies communication because,
Okay.
and of course, also we are animals, right? We have this disconnect. There's humans and then there's animals, but, we're animals too, right? Our species is the species that has kind of stepped away from the rest and forgotten how to use this language, right? But
Mhm.
the practice and the process of learning and relearning and reclaiming this language, it's the same whether you're working with an animal companion in your family or a wild one of any species, insects to birds to uh, whales, the process is the same. Trees,
Mhm.
plants. Now, what each individual being is interested in communicating about is going to vary, right? Everybody has their own lives.
Mhm.
Everybody has their own perspective. Everybody has their own orientation. Some animals are much more kind of individually oriented. Some are, I'm thinking of like ants or bees or some of the bird species that are very flock oriented, may communicate more as a collective, right? But the actual process is the same for learning, for each person to recognize how we can receive these kinds of communications.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess what we've seen is with us, there's certain things that get in the way,
Right.
right? And that is, you can call them, I mean, just with the people that are come to see my conferences, I see it.
Mhm.
Because some people, I just remember an email from one gentleman, and what had happened is I had someone in who was doing Reiki, talking about Reiki, and she did a meditation.
Mhm.
And I got this scathing email from this fellow that said that, I thought the stuff that you were teaching was pretty good until I noticed that you were doing this, I think he said, stupid farcical stuff on Reiki and doing meditation. He says, I'm now unsubscribing. It's like, oh, okay. So he was gone. Very simply, I don't think he's one of my followers now.
Yeah.
You know,
Bless
but
him,
but people have that, right?
Yeah. Right. And that is really, that is my work, is helping people who are interested. Not everybody's interested, right? Not everybody has the desire, right, to
That's right.
to cultivate this. And it requires people to be willing to shed some of those layers of conditioning that we have that prevent us from remembering how to use this language, right? And I think that's the biggest problem that most people have who struggle, right? And there can be that kind of resistance like you described, like I'm just not going to do that woo-woo stuff, right? Okay, fine, that's fine, but other people, may be very interested in it, but they struggle with discounting it or not trusting it. And that's our cultural conditioning,
Yeah.
particularly in our Western cultures, where we're really conditioned to, overemphasize our thinking, rational, linear ways of being and our fast-paced lifestyles, even our technology-driven lifestyles, all that can put all of these layers on top that make it hard for us to drop in to this innate, natural way of knowing. So it requires a willingness to just let go of some of that, a willingness to learn how to be quiet, a willingness to look at all the ways we discount ourselves, right? And silence those parts of us. And that's where I say that's actually a spiritual journey. And I don't know any other way to teach animal communication, interspecies communication, other than as a spiritual practice and a spiritual journey. It doesn't necessarily mean people need to sit on a meditation cushion, right? And, have a formal kind of practice in that way. But what happens when we start to really reconnect with all of life, it changes us. And we can't go through the world in the same way that we could before. When we start to recognize animals as sentient beings who have their own lives and their own spirituality and their own purpose and their own perception, their own wisdom that, in many cases, way beyond what our species has been able to understand up until this point. When we start to recognize that and recognize our own disconnection from that as humans, that's life-changing. And once you start on that path, the little secret I tell my students right after they started is, okay, you actually can't go back now. You're on the path, right? And once you've started, there's no turning around and getting off of it, right? The path is going to wind around and it's going to spiral and it's going to do this and that, but you can't go back once you've had that kind of opening, right? Just like, for you in that experience with that dog in your practice, like you can't unring that bell, right? You just, you know,
Yeah.
that's open, that's there. You've got that experience. And so it's a spiritual journey, and it's a beautiful journey. It's a heart opening, connecting, grounding way of being that I think most of our species is hungry for. You know, we're so tired of being disconnected, and we're so tired of, you know, the treadmill, right? And the way that we have to live in most of our in our modern cultures, in our modern worlds, and we can do it a different way without, you know,
Yeah.
necessarily having to leave our lives, leave our jobs, leave the cities that we live in. We can learn how to reconnect no matter where we are.
Yeah. 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 You don't have to go on a retreat to do it
No,
or anything.
no,
That
no.
might help you get going, but
Yeah,
you don't have to do that,
no, you don't. And
No.
it could help you, but, you know, also simple things, right? Simple things like turning off your phone, right? Taking out the headphones, turning off the TV, turning off the background noise, right? You know, go sit outside in your yard or your garden. Or if you live in a city, just go, you know, sit on a park bench under a tree, right? You know, simple things that you can do. Go sit with your cat. Go, you know, go to the barn and just sit with your horse while they're eating, right? Just practice being in a quiet way, that is different than our normal human, you know, to-do lists and the running commentary and the talkie and the noise and the I can't have any downtime and I have to always be educating myself with podcasts and, you know, all of that stuff that we do. Just set it aside. Even if it's, I tell people, even if it's just 10 minutes a day, right? 10 minutes in the morning, you take your coffee, go sit on your porch and be with the birds. No phone, right? That in itself can be profoundly opening and life-changing.
Yep, I very much agree. Yeah, because it's just a question of saying I can get up and I can check my emails,
Yeah,
or I can go and sit outside, watch the sun come up,
yeah,
and absorb it all,
yeah.
so yeah. So in terms of, like, say, we've got this cultural conditioning, that is against the thing. You had something regarding, I thought this was kind of human centrism, and then linked, I think that's linked to your fur babies comment.
Oh yeah, yeah, I've mentioned that. So, you know, I think talking about the things that can get in our way, right? One of the big things that gets in the way is this idea that our species has that we are the superior species. We are the top of the evolutionary scale, and we have the best brains, and we've got language and all that stuff. And we know now, even, you know, scientists are helping us understand through these incredible you know, research projects with other species, you know, like Robin Wall Kimmerer says, you know, not once in any of those studies is it proven that animals are dumber than we actually thought they were, right? That it's always that, you know, that, right? And so we have this idea that we're the dominant ones, we're the superior ones.
Yeah,
And that's in a lot of our cultures, it's in a lot of our religious traditions, unfortunately. And it can get in our way from approaching animals as equals, right?
yeah,
And I should say other than human animals, right? You know, of course they're different from us, and we can learn a lot from them, right? And so, you know, I understand from a animal welfare point of view, people who care about animal welfare and treating our animal companions, you know, humanely and with kindness as a family member, right? Sometimes, you know, with that good intention in mind, I think that's where some of this language like fur babies has come from, right? That, you know, they are our family member, but they're actually not babies, right? they're not children. They're not, they're not our children. I don't even love the word pets. I mean, we all use it as kind of a shorthand for what we're talking about with companions. And, it's not the worst thing in the world, but even that word has a little bit of a connotation of, they're less than, right?
Mhm.
Um, and while of course it's important for us as, in the way our world is set up, and we have animal friends in our families who are companions, of course we're responsible for them, right? Of course we need to take care of them. Of course we're the ones who buy the food and put it in the bowls and, do the walks and hire the pet sitters and, all of the things, right? But I think we just, language matters. And even if we can shift away from the kinds of language that kind of infantilizes other species, I think just that subtle shift can help us shift our awareness into really recognizing who they are, and what they have to share with us and what they can teach us.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I say in the context you talk about it, calling them a fur baby is condescending.
Yeah, a little bit.
And so you want to elevate them to being an equal,
Yeah,
at least,
yeah,
and that way you stand a chance to be able to have the right tone of conversation with them.
yeah. And what I find with people is when they shift, right? And even shifting out of like, uh speaking in baby talk to their animal family members, right? Um, when people shift into that kind of an orientation, and it's not to disparage anybody who uses that language because it comes with the best of intentions, right? But making that shift, the animals will feel it. And then they'll go, oh, she's treating me like I, am a aware, sentient being with a full life, with preferences and opinions and perspectives and wisdom and, all the things. And then they'll wake up and then they'll go, oh, well, this is a different thing, right? And then the relationship has the opportunity to evolve.
Yeah.
And then that's when the communication can start to happen, right? Because, we have to remember animals, they have, other than human animals, have not forgotten how to do this, right? This is their innate language. We all have our species language, dogs bark, birds sing, all of that. But they haven't forgotten the universal language. And so once we wake up and are open to that way of being with them, almost all of the time they'll go, oh, something else is going on with this person. And then they'll step forward to try to help, right?
Mm.
And they'll really like work hard to like, send you messages. Did you get it? Did you get it? Did you get it? Right? And that then can be a real foundation for a partnership with your animal friend, where, okay, look, I get that you're an expert in this language. I'm not yet, but will you help me? Right. And even that kind of an approach of, in this way, I'm going to be your student, right? I'm going to learn from you. Now, you can learn from me too, right? And we can learn, we can help our animal friends understand, for example, how to live in the human world, right? And what's
Yeah.
appropriate to do in the human world and what's not appropriate to do in the human world, right? But then it becomes a partnership. And that's where it gets really exciting, because the animals go, oh, wow, she wants to hear me. She wants to understand me. She's getting it. And then they just get so excited and they just come forward, and then it just grows and it builds. And you can see I get really excited about this because
Yeah.
this has the potential. I mean, in the big picture, this has the potential to change the world, one relationship at a time.
Yeah. Yeah. The whole idea is have them as our equal, and
Yeah.
on that footing, then you can start having a conversation with them.
Exactly. It doesn't mean we ask them to file our income taxes or, drive the car, right? To just use a silly example, right? We recognize our differences, but that fundamental attitude of respect, even
Yeah.
when we, approach wild ones, right? I had somebody say to me recently, oh, don't go over there towards the bird feeders. You'll scare them away, right? Well, if we approach the bird feeders in this quiet, respectful way, we might discover that the birds are totally fine coming to the feeders with us 2 feet away, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So this communication, like the one that I described, it was a feeling.
Mhm.
Occasionally I get images. I'll sort of see something out, as I call it, out the corner of my eye that doesn't exist.
Mhm.
Uh, that type of idea. What do you find in terms of how people communicate when they're able to do this?
There's a whole bunch of different ways that people can receive.
Mhm.
And most of us, like you've described, will have one or sometimes two kind of dominant ways that we most naturally receive, especially at the beginning. And so for you, clearly, one of your dominant ways is that feeling, that emotional sense of being able to empathically feel and reflected in your own emotional response what's going on with an animal, right? So visual is another one. And, people who may have been exposed to some other kinds of, psychic development training, sometimes we'll talk about this in terms of clairs, right? So clairsentience, clairaudience, et
Right.
cetera.
Yeah.
Yeah, but so the visual is a common way that many people will receive also. So it can be anything from what you describe of this little blip kind of off the side, right? Some people will see it like a photograph. Some people will kind of see a movie, right? Or, getting a visual image. Another way that we can receive is kinesthetically. And so receiving sensations in our own body, physical sensations or awareness or knowledge. So for example, if I'm communicating with an animal that has an upset stomach, I might get that sense of nausea in my own stomach just for, a few seconds until I get that information and then it moves through. We can also hear and understand um, uh, through sound. So that could look like either hearing what an animal is hearing, right? Um, or hearing, even some kind of a message, right? Or hearing a voice. Some people will receive in that way. And, with messages, there's a couple of different things that can be going on there. Sometimes an animal will send a very strong verbal message, like, get me out of here. I remember one of my own cats when I, was in a PetSmart shopping, I heard this message. Hey, I'm your cat over here in the cattery at the adoption center. Get me out of here. I need to come home with you, right? And it came in that way, just like a message. Hey, over here, right? So that can happen. And also what our brain will do is we will translate what we get from those other ways of knowing, right, into a message so that we can communicate it through our human language.
Right.
So those are just some ways we can see and feel and hear from inside an animal's perspective. And then we can also do kind of what we talked about in the first example that you shared, which is just like that general sense of knowing, right? Like I understand what's going on here with this animal, and people don't always know how they know what they know, but they just know, right? And so sometimes I call that just like the whole gestalt. You get the whole big picture, which can include a lot of the other ways of knowing as well. So typically, people will have one or two that are the strongest for them. And I encourage people to think about in those times where you have experienced some kind of communication already. How did that come in for you? It's a question I ask my students a lot. How did that come in? Did you get a picture? Did you get a feeling? Did you sense it in your body? Did you feel it as a message? How did it come in? And unlike some of our other ways of learning things in our human world, rather than focusing on, and people naturally want to do this, well, I just get feelings, I don't get anything else, right? Rather than focusing on how the ways you're not receiving, you recognize and nourish and say yes to the ways that you are receiving. I
Mm.
get
Yeah.
feelings. right? And you just like, I talk about it as like fertilize the plant, right? You've got your little plant growing and you're just going to take the best care of it and fertilize it and nourish it and, give it all the right things, right? And you grow that. And then your confidence starts to build. And then you have more and more experiences of feeling, right? Empathically feeling.
Yeah.
And then the more you trust that, then what usually happens for people is some of the other ways of receiving can start to open up. And so people who are predominantly feelers will start to get pictures, or they'll start to get sounds, or they'll start to get a sensation in their body because it becomes more available the more you are open to it, basically. And the other thing I'll say about that is that for people who might be familiar with learning theory or multiple intelligences, right?
Mhm.
The ways that people are oriented to the world in terms of how they learn will often be reflected in how they receive telepathic communication. So, for
Yeah.
example, people who are visual learners will often be visual receivers, right? People who are kinesthetic learners will often be kinesthetic receivers. It's not always 100% one-to-one, but if you know that you're an auditory learner, for example, pay attention then to that sense when you're communicating with animals, and you might find that that auditory sense is one of your strongest sense, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that makes total sense. Yeah, and that is focus on the thing that's working,
Yes,
and use that with for your training wheels, and then try to
exactly.
develop the other ones as well,
Yeah, yeah,
somehow. And you got to be
yeah,
promoting it and telling your dog, I want to talk to you
yeah, yeah.
somehow.
And our animal friends want to communicate with us too. They want to be understood, right?
Yeah.
I mean, almost all behavior, conflicts that I've ever worked with, are based on a misunderstanding, right? A human animal misunderstanding. A behavior problem always makes sense from the animal's perspective, right? Well,
Yeah.
what if we can actually understand what that perspective is? Why aren't you using that litter box, right? Or whatever the example is, right?
Yeah.
Then we can, our animals want to be understood. They want us to understand them. They want harmony. They want to be closer to us, right? And so,
Mhm.
when we have that kind of approach of, okay, I'm the kindergarten learner here and you're the graduate student, will you help me? Right? Then almost always, that they'll come forward and be so willing
Okay.
to help us along.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. They all want to do that from what I've seen. Yeah.
yeah,
It's just that we're a little bit too oblivious to them, and we're not we're
exactly,
not we're not paying attention.
exactly.
Okay.
And that's the work, right? To retrain our
Yeah.
attention, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. And when you think of as you're the picture I was getting as you were talking about this was, as I would call it, a native Indian, Aboriginal, whatever word we're using right now, but as in when they were communing with their spirits, so not just animals, but spirits and such. They would actually go to a lodge. They would do certain things or walk for days or whatever. But the point is, they were getting into that space where they could do that.
Yeah,
And here we're talking about, hey, the space you need means dumping your phone, closing your computer, and sorry, oh, that's right, I've got a dog here. I'm focusing on that dog.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Or
exactly.
cats. But cats are
Yeah.
more elusive, but yeah.
And even with the external, there's the external quieting, right, that we can do in
Mhm.
our environment.
Yeah.
And then there's also the internal quieting, and the internal quieting is harder for most of us, right? Because we have that running commentary inside, right? The thinking, you
Mhm.
know. And one of the other things that I help people when they're taking classes with me to try to understand and feel for themselves is what does it feel like inside me when my thinking mind is going on a roll, right? Because for most of us, it's so automatic. We don't even recognize that we're thinking. And that's where, practices like meditation can be really useful because they help us to see how much our thinking mind is thinking, right? And they can also give us some tools to drop underneath that thinking mind. And, doing battle with it is never a good idea, right? Because it doesn't work, right? Stop thinking, stop thinking, stop thinking, stop thinking. And what are you doing? It's like, don't look at the elephant in the middle of the room. All you see is the elephant, right? And so, doing battle with it isn't useful, but just going, oh, I'm thinking again. There's those running human thoughts, doing their thing. Okay, you go over here and just keep doing your thing. I'm going to stay here with my cat and I'm just going to be with her. The thinking can continue to happen, but we can shift our focus away from that thinking. And then again, that's where that authentic, deeper level of communication can come in.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's what we need to be able to do. Yeah.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
the thing about communication is that it's very easy for us to doubt. And that is get a message and then it's kind of like, did I make that up?
Mhm.
Or whatever. And here's just to give you an example on that one. There was one time I was in a different city and I was in a hotel and I got up that morning and real early and we had some really heavy meetings going on. This was for it's actually a court cases for veterinarians, and I was on the board reviewing some. But anyway, the point is, got up early and I thought, okay, I'm just going to go for a walk. Because this stuff was so heavy, and so it was a misty morning, like at 6 a.m. And I'm just going down. This is in the city, okay. And as I'm going down this road, and then all of a sudden I got this. I'm getting into this word. And I got this grief dumped on me. And I got a message, and it says, "Why am I here?" And it was so blatant. I mean, I actually looked around, going, "Who said that?" Because I thought this, and I looked around, nothing. Right? And anyway, I just went a little bit further, and the road was on a hill, and I was on the upside on the sidewalk. And what I did is I crossed over the other side, and down below was a horse farm.
Oh.
And the thing that happened then is that here I am looking at this barn. There's paddocks on the outside, which I'm not kidding, are the tubular rail paddocks. And there must have been a dozen of them. And these paddocks are 12 by 12, really small, really small paddock. And there's one horse outside in a paddock. And as soon as I went over and I looked down, I just more or less said, was that you? I mean, the horse wasn't looking at me. The horse was looking away. And was that you? And at that second, the horse actually turned around and saw me.
Mhm.
And so yeah, I made it all up. I mean, that didn't happen. It's very easy to do that.
Mhm.
Okay. And the horse was just, I mean, the feeling was still strong in me. It's like, what did I do wrong? Why am I here? It was that type of thing. As in, I'm being punished. I'm being put in this little
Yeah.
enclosure, right?
Yeah.
That really, first off, yeah, I got that message, but that really changed how I started thinking about people with horses and what they do with them, do to them, and such. It's like, God, that is so far from natural,
Mhm.
you know.
Yeah.
And but that just sort of gives you an idea that, it'd be easy for me to think, dreamt it all up,
Right.
right?
But you saw the horse, right?
But yeah, well,
The
I
situation,
did not
and you
know.
had that,
I didn't.
yeah, you didn't
I didn't.
know who was putting that out, and in that situation, like, do we know that the horse knew there was a human coming who would be able to hear his communication, or was it that that was just the energy this horse was putting out, in that moment? I'm grieving. I don't understand. Why am I here? You don't know what the backstory is there, right?
Yeah.
Did he just lose his person? Was he being isolated for who knows what the story was, right? And so that was out there, and you in your open way, were able to receive that, right?
Mhm.
And and but it's also an example of, it's harder to discount it. Like if you had the big grief and the message, but you hadn't actually seen that situation, right? And you hadn't had him turn and look at you, it would be easier to discount it than it was when you actually were able to put those two things together, right?
Yeah, that's
You
right.
know,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
yeah,
No, it was like I say, it's the strong emotions that get to
yeah,
me, you know.
yeah, yeah,
And boy, yeah, that one was just so strong. But it was
yeah,
just so weird because I heard this clearly, and I didn't even have a clue where it was coming from. And then next thing is I go over, oh, there's horses.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I didn't know. Yeah, and
yeah,
he probably did hear me, I mean, as
yeah,
a horse. Of course he heard me, you know.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, heard me
yeah.
walking.
Hmm. Hmm.
Okay.
And one of the ways that people can work with, I mean, again, it's just a great example. Thank you for sharing that. And um, one of the ways that people can work with that habit of discounting or not, building the capacity to trust what we're getting, right? Because is it true that we can make stuff up? Yes, of course we can, right? Is it true that we can, hear something that we think is something from an animal, but it's really our own thoughts, our own ideas, our own whatever?
Mhm.
Sure, right?
Sure.
And so one of the things that's helpful is to practice this way of communicating, ideally in an environment where you've got, a lot of support, right? Um, but with or with a person, in your life who is open to this, right? Where you can get some kind of verification or confirmation about what you're getting, right?
Yeah.
And especially what I call low stakes kinds of conversations. So, not something that is so emotionally packed as the example that you described, where that communication kind of spontaneously came in, but simple things that aren't so kind of fraught, right? Not the big life and death things, right? But just practice with your, maybe you've got a friend who lives on the other side of the country and you've never been to their home, but it's an old friend and you've never met their dog, say, right? If they're open to it, practice, right? Practice with the dog. Show me what your house looks like. Show me what you like to do, right? And your friend, if they're, a good friend and open, you don't want to do this with somebody who's gonna, not support you, right?
Or judge
But,
you.
judge you, yeah. But, somebody who's into it, right? Like, oh, you get this little snippet of, whatever the thing is, right? The favorite toy, or, what it looks like when, his person, goes to the door to do whatever she does in the morning, right? You know, and then you start to build your confidence, right? You start to build your muscle. And then you learn how to trust.
Yeah.
And then the more you learn how to notice what those authentic communications feel like, how they come in, like for you, now, how those authentic ones feel for you. And
Mhm.
some of them are heavy duty, right? But like, okay, when I get that and the message, I'm going to pay attention to that. There's something going on, right? But you learn to trust it the more you get those confirmations in all kinds of situations.
Okay. So practice
Yeah.
lots.
Yeah, practice, support, um, surround yourself with, as much as possible, people who are gonna support you in this,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, that's the thing. If you've got naysayers around you who are discounting it,
yeah,
it's going to destroy you.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
you're not going to be able to do it,
no,
so
yeah,
and so on that theme, you don't tell everybody what you're doing.
Right. Right.
You tell the specific ones you want.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And especially at the beginning, right? When you're not confident, when you're just learning, when you're
Yeah.
just discovering. No, it's a very precious, holy, tender thing that you want to protect. It's back to that plant, right? We want to nurture that plant, right? So you don't expose it to, freezing weather when it's just sprouting, right? You keep it inside, you keep it nurtured, when it's a big, strong, healthy plant, yes, then you can take it outside and it can survive the frost, right? So it's the same thing, just like you keep that, you really honor it and only share it with people who are really going to support you. Even if they don't understand it, or even if they maybe aren't interested in doing it themselves, people who aren't going to discount you and and judge you for it or shame you or ridicule you or anything like that.
Yeah.
I mean, ideally we don't have those kinds of people in our lives already, but if we do, we don't share the deepest things in our heart with them.
Yeah, no, definitely not. Okay.
Mhm.
So all good words. That's what we need to practice, and we need to do it in a protected environment that we can create, a quiet environment, which we create, that type of idea. Any sort of final thoughts on this at all, Nancy?
Ask your animals for help. I mean, we've kind of said that already, but when you ask your animals for help and expect to be able to communicate with them, assume that they can understand you, even if you're not sure you can understand them, right? They're a lot better at this and they can help you. And I find that so much of a shift will begin to happen in a relationship, um, especially with our companion animals. Once we have that approach of asking them for their help, saying, I'm really trying to do this. I'm really trying to understand you more. Would you help me? And then, and then there they are.
Hmm. Here's a question, and I'm just sort of pondering this. We're getting ourselves into a state of mind where we're going to be receptive and also broadcasting.
Mhm.
Is there an optimal time in the dog? And what I'm thinking is, if I've got a dog and who's just on a walk and he's hyper alert, looking at everything and paying attention to that, is that the time to try to connect with that dog, or is it better to have the dog in a quiet setting as well?
Yeah, that's a really good question. You know what I would say, there's no hard and fast rules about that, right?
Okay.
But you're sometimes people think, oh, the animal needs to be quiet and sitting down and not doing, though they can be doing their normal life, right? But for the human person who's just beginning, and the walk might not be the ideal time because you're also paying attention to leash and traffic and other dogs and what's going on, and the dog is on high alert. If you were able to communicate with your dog at that point in time, chances are you're going to get a lot about, like, I mean, it'll blow your mind if you can ask them to show you the smells, for example, that they get on the bush or the telephone pole, and and what that's like for them and how it comes in to their nose, and how they can identify, oh, that's Roger who lives over on that street, that's his pee, and and that's so and so from over there, and oh, I know that one, I met them the other day and I didn't like them, whatever it is, right? But so you absolutely can, right, as you're practicing, and you might get a lot of those kinds of things. Or I don't want to go down that road. That whatever, for whatever reason, I don't like that street. Or, so it's not to say you can't. And it's also to say that for humans, especially just starting out, that might be a lot of input, right? As you get more practice and as you get more experience. But I wouldn't discourage somebody from staying open to communication when you're on the walk. The only time that I suggest that people not try to practice communication, and even this is not a hard and fast rule, but it's a suggestion that I have for most situations, is if an animal is under anesthesia. because then, it's a whole different kind of thing. And so it's not really the best time to communicate with them in most
Okay.
situations. However, that said, I've had communications with my own animals under anesthesia, where I thought they were going to potentially not be waking up from that anesthesia. And, this is one of my cats, and he came in and he said, "I'm going to be okay. The vet has, she's found the problem. She's going to be able to fix it. I'm going to be okay. I'm going to be able to come home." And maybe 30 seconds after I got that communication from him, the phone rang with the vet saying what she had found and that she thought she could take care of it, and he was going to make it. So it's not to say that you can't get those kinds of communications, but it's harder, I think, for most people,
Yeah.
especially again, people who maybe not be as experienced.
Yeah.
So
So
yeah.
here's a sort of extension on that, and that is when I'm talking to a dog, am I talking to them? I don't know the words on this one. Am I talking to them sort of in that awake state where they're reactive and all that, or am I talking to a deeper underlying energy being?
It can be both.
Ah,
Um,
okay.
and and some people will separate that out. And I really don't take this approach, but one way of thinking about it is, okay, there's the physical being, and then there's the spiritual being where we're communicating on the soul level. And those are two separate things. There's physical level and there's
Gotcha.
soul level. And
Okay.
I just don't experience it that way with that kind of a separation, right? that that all communication is soul level potentially, because all animals have souls and all animals can communicate from that level of the soul, whatever that is. And very often that can be interwoven with the physical lives, so it doesn't need to be separate. So talking about the physical life and what's happening in the relationship and the behavior and the daily things, and the illness or wellness, whatever, that is one layer of what an animal is able to communicate with us
Mhm.
about. And interwoven in that layer may be a tremendous amount of understanding on the spiritual or soul level. So sometimes people will say, well, there's the higher self and then there's the physical self. And again, I personally don't experience it that way, like a higher self and a lower self. I think it's all available. And we can focus on the level that may be the most important to focus on in any particular conversation, right?
Mhm.
Um,
Okay.
and just to use a kind of basic example that a lot of people might be able to relate to. A cat has stopped using the litter box. Okay, we want to know on the physical level what's going on with that from the cat's perspective, right? If there's, a physical problem, blah, 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 blah. Now, in some cases, it's just the physical problem, right? She changed the litter. I hate the litter. Tell her to go back to the old litter. Okay, problem solved. Sometimes there's a medical issue. Sometimes it might be connected to something on that spiritual level that the animal really wants to communicate about also, right?
Mhm.
uh, and about the relationship or about what's going on or about the cat's awareness of who he is as a being in relationship with this person and what he wants to help her understand, and how he wants to help her grow and what their purpose is together, right? All of that can evolve from that conversation about the litter box, right? It's all available. Um, and where we choose to focus, in any one conversation, just like any conversation, we can't talk about everything all at the same time, all in one conversation, right? And so we can choose. So some people, for example, some people will book a consultation with me. They'll just want to talk about, what's my spiritual relationship with this being? who are we to each other? What are we here to learn together? What are they here to teach me? What do I need to understand about them? You know, who are we as souls together, right? What's our purpose together? They're wonderful conversations to have. And that's all available. So I think that was a very long-winded answer to your very succinct question, which is, I think it's both, right? I think it's both.
Yeah, there's two distinct things that are intertwined.
Exactly. Exactly.
Something like that.
You know, I mean, I know you and I are both whale lovers, so I think about the times I've had the privilege to be in the presence of whales. And you know, I'm thinking about the Atlantic humpback whales that I've spent a lot of time with. And they have shown me they have this incredible capacity to be both very anchored and grounded in their physical reality of, you know, whatever they're doing with their young, with their, you know, with the pod, with their, you know, companions, right? The whatever. And at the same time, not separate from that, have this incredible expanded awareness of, you know, to put it in a shorthand term, the cosmos, right? Like, you know, and it's not two different things. It's not, oh, their higher self, you know, in their awareness of the wisdom of the cosmos, and their lower self, you know, in the water swimming with their baby. No, it's both. It's both, and it's all at the same time, right?
Yeah,
It's all there. It's all available.
yeah,
So,
neat.
yeah.
Okay. Well, that's probably a really good place to end, as we sort of come to a natural conclusion here.
Oh,
I mean, this has been great. And so people are probably wondering, gee, can I do this? You've got something to help them through on that process?
yeah, I do. You can find, I think you'll put the link to a
Yeah.
class that I have. It's a free class. It's called The Basics of Animal Communication. And it'll give you some, you know, a little bit of an orientation, kind of like what we've been doing here today, of how this, you know, how this process works,
Yeah.
what it is, how you can start, some tools to begin. There's a meditation and there's some other materials in the class. So that's free. And you can access that on my website. I've got a lot of other free resources on my website too that people can have a look at. So I encourage
Okay.
them to check that out.
Yep. I'll have that set up. No
All
problem.
right.
Okay. So thank you
Great.
for coming on board, Nancy.
Thank you, Jeff. This has been a really fun conversation.
Yeah,
I've really
it's
thank you
been
for
great.
sharing your stories and
You're,
your beautiful heart. And thank you for everything that you're doing to educate people.
you're very welcome.
Yeah,
This is what I love doing. So we're going to
it's
keep this
obvious.
going. So thank you. And thank you everyone for watching. If you're still here, great. And certainly if you're interested in following up on animal communication, Nancy's got some ways she can help you out. But anyway, make sure you give your kids a hug, try and see what they're telling you. I'll catch you in the next webinar.